All right, this is our next to last week talking about church leadership. And we've been on quite a bit of a journey as we've done so, covering it, I think, in some different ways. And we've been talking about how in the church, because we follow King Jesus, all leadership is a race to the bottom because we follow the King who washed feet. And this has been our memory verse as we've gone through this. So let's say our memory verse together. Let's go. Whoever wants to be a leader among you must be your servant, and whoever wants to be first among you must be the slave of everyone else. For even the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve others, and to give his life as a ransom for many. This is the example that Jesus sets, and all leadership in the church and God's people must follow this pattern. Last week, we spent a lot of time looking at the difference between leadership and power and authority. We saw that leadership is the act of guiding and leading others, but you don't necessarily have to have power or authority to lead. And we saw that power is the ability or the capacity to influence and control others. You can take power, and you can have power without really being much of a leader, but authority is the legitimate right to exercise power and to make decisions on behalf of others. And authority, when we discuss authority, we're asking who is rightfully in charge and who gets to make decisions for other people. And so with this in mind, we noted that someone has authority. We noted that someone who has authority only when you agree with them doesn't have authority at all. For instance, if a police officer, if their authority to pull me over and give me a ticket is based on my agreement that that is a reasonable speed limit and that I was agreeing, I would have paid a lot less in speeding tickets over the years. They have authority regardless of whether or not I agree with them. We saw this, all authority comes from being under the authority of someone else, and that in the church specifically, all authority starts with moral authority. The only people who can have any authority in the church are people who are actively and consistently living out the way of Jesus. In the church, authority comes from the testimony of the church and from the anointing of the Holy Spirit. And finally, we saw that in the church, authority is given for a purpose, leading others to Christ through evangelism and discipleship. So all this talk of authority sounds good, but it raises some really practical questions. And I know this because over the last several days, and then before that, weeks and even years, I've had really sometimes intense conversations where people ask really legitimate questions. Because when you talk about authority, you get into some weird kind of iffy places at times. And so as I've been really thinking and studying through authority intentionally over the last several years, these questions have been in the back of my mind the whole time. We're going to look at these questions today, questions I've had with many of you in conversations, the best way I know to answer them. The first question is this: why is it necessary for certain people to have authority over God's church? Why can't we just each say we're kind of sovereign citizens in this kingdom? Why need someone to be over us? Can't I just follow Jesus? Some people have said very specifically, all I need is me and my Bible to be a Christian. It's an interesting question. It even sounds like it sounds kind of valid. Late last year, some Mormon missionaries came over to our house. I don't think they knew whose door they were knocking on. And we invited them in, had a long conversation with these three young guys, and they were very nice, very kind. They knew their Bible well. We had a really great conversation. And at the end of this conversation, I said, well, as we've talked this whole time, it really sounds like we believe a lot of the same things. They're like, yeah, I think we do. And in our core areas of theology about Jesus being the Son of God and his death saving us and being saved by grace through faith, like these are all things that we've agreed on there. Oh yeah, absolutely, we agree on this. And I said, then let me ask you a question. Why are you coming to my house? Like, well, what do you mean? Like, why are you evangelizing me? What's the goal here if we agree about all of this stuff? Like when I talk to somebody about Jesus, I know exactly why I want them to come to know Jesus if they don't already. The point of evangelism is introducing them to the Savior and the King. But if you guys think that we agree all this about the same stuff, then why are you here trying to convince me to go to your church? And they said, well, it's because of authority. Oh, that's a good answer. That's an interesting answer. Please tell me what you mean. And they said, well, we believe that Joseph Smith was given the keys of the kingdom, was given authority by God when he was given the Book of Mormon. Joseph Smith was given authority to lead God's church in these latter days. So the Mormon church is now the one true church. And so even if we believe the same things, you should come to the Mormon church so that you can be under proper authority. That is a great answer. It's an insightful answer. These are some young men who understand the importance of being under the authority of God's rightful leaders. Clearly, I didn't join the Mormon church because I don't believe that Joseph Smith had the moral authority to back up his claims of a word from God. But I think that the way that they talked about authority made a lot of sense. A couple of years before that, I had another friend who became Catholic. He referred to it as a conversion. And in talking to him about why do you feel the need to join the Catholic Church? And he said, well, at the end of the day, it's because in my research, I believe that they have proper authority. See, the Catholic Church can trace its leadership all the way back to the apostles, and the Catholic Church makes a big deal about apostolic authority, knowing that Jesus put people in charge and those people put people in charge, and so there's been this unbroken chain of people who are in charge. And so because of that conviction that he wanted to be under the proper spiritual authority, he became Catholic. It's a young man who understands the power of authority. Now, this morning, I'm not at a Catholic church because 500 years ago, Martin Luther said, hey, I've got some issues with the morality of what's going on here in our leadership. Martin Luther did not say, I want to stop being Catholic. He just said, we need to change. And the Catholic Church said, no thanks, you're out. They kicked him out. And so he and many others determined to try to follow Jesus on their own. And you might say, yeah, well, that was 500 years ago. Maybe it's time to join the fold again. And I would say it's a fair point. But for my entire adult life, the main thing that I have seen in the news about the Catholic Church is scandal and abuse and cover-up. So I can't, which is not a condemnation of our Catholic friends and even brothers and sisters, people who follow Jesus. It's not a condemnation of them. It's to say that I can't put myself under the spiritual authority of someone who I don't know is following the moral authority of Jesus. Are you with me? Authority matters. Now, if you're new here, like, man, this dude's just jumping right into blasting other groups. Those of you who know me know that that's not who I am. I'm not here to throw shade or cast judgment on other groups of people. The reality is that I might be very thankful to be a Protestant. I am. But there's a reason that the Protestant churches are collapsing as well. The people have left by the millions. See, I get a benefit that a lot of you don't have. I get to meet our new folks when they first show up. I'm the one that gets to take them to coffee or to smoothies or to ice cream or whatever. We'll get lunch, we'll talk, and I'll say, tell me your story. And almost inevitably, the stories that I hear from people who have been separated from church for a long time and are now putting their toes back in the water, their toes of hurt. The number of stories that I have heard of people who have been hurt by churches and specifically church leadership is phenomenal, heartbreaking, gut-wrenching. One of the first conversations I had as the preacher, once I took this role, was with a new lady to the church, and when I asked her story, she said, man, I used to be really, really involved in church, and we had this little church that we loved, and we had a pastor there who I was just on his side. I loved this guy who was leading us towards Jesus, and one day he asked me to get lunch, and he said, you know you're going to hell, right? That was news to her. He said, you're going to hell because you won't divorce your husband. Her husband wasn't a believer. He said, your husband's going to raise your kids not to follow Jesus, and so the fact that you won't divorce him means you're going to go to hell. And she said, I never went back, and I haven't been back to church since until I came here. I've talked to people who have been called disloyal. I've talked to people who have been told the opposite of the divorce thing, that you're actually going to hell or you're not welcome here because you divorced your spouse. And they're like, but they were cheating on me. They said, we don't care. You're not welcome here anymore. Of course they left. I've talked to people who have been ignored, I got coffee with someone recently who said, in all the years I've been a member of a church everywhere, and it's been decades, you're the first church leader who's ever asked to get together with me and just get to know me. Of course, people have also been abused and taken advantage of in our churches in every possible way as well. It's actually extremely unusual for me now to have conversations with someone new without hearing about deep church wounds. It's no wonder people have left the church by the millions. It's actually kind of hard to blame them when you start hearing their stories. People just want a church that will help them follow Jesus, and what they get is hurt instead. Families want a church where they can just love others and be loved by others, and what they find instead is drama and pain. Like, we're all just looking for shelter, I think, in this immoral world, but what we find so often are churches and church leaders who make the church unsafe, and you find the same moral chaos inside the church as well as outside. For so many people, this has been their story. We must be better than that. The church needs us. The world needs us to be better than that. And most importantly, Jesus has called us to be better than that. Now, all of this is actually not an argument against church leadership and authority. I would say all of this is actually a crisis of godly leadership and authority in many, many churches. People are desperate to find communities of Christians who are led by trustworthy people who can point them to Jesus. And wherever people can find that now, they are flocking to those churches. The church needs godly people in authority because we need trustworthy guides to lead us and give us wise counsel. We can't do life on our own. 70 to 90 years is not enough to figure this thing out. And so the wisdom of people who have done it well before is desperately needed. And we need godly judges who can settle disputes. This is from Matthew 18 and 1 Corinthians 6. Like, having godly people who can wisely help you sort out your disputes with others is so valuable and rare. And the church needs people who can make decisions for all of us as the church goes through different challenges and throughout different time. We see this in Acts 15. Actually, communion this morning is an interesting example of this. So it's not done on purpose. It's just kind of a happy accident. Kai leaned over and said, "Why did Randy pray for Ashlyn?" Great question. I told him he had to wait till the sermon. He said, "I wasn't planning on going anywhere." So when we went through the women's role study a couple of years ago, the shepherds did this deep in-dive study, and they said, we see examples of women teaching throughout Scripture, and so we affirm that that is good. We see examples of women praying too, but here's the deal. Our church was deeply divided. Not about should women pray. In Bible classes and small groups and all the different things we do, the church was like, we're good with it, and the shepherd said, absolutely. But the church, just us, were divided almost 50-50 in how we felt about women leading prayers here in the assembly. And so the shepherd said, we affirm it in Scripture, but for the health of the body, let's not. And so Ashlyn said, I've got this communion thing that hit me when I was reading the Bible that I would like to share. Can I? And I said, the elder said yes. But you're going to have someone else pray for you. And she went, oh. Oh, is she in here still? I mean, she went, good point, Father. Explain more. She's like, why? That doesn't make any sense. And then I explained to her what I just told you. And she said, oh, okay. I said, go ask one of the elders. It was their decision. And so Randy agreed to pray. Now, you might be sitting in here like I was and saying, some portion of this seems off to me. To which I would say, aren't you glad you're not the shepherds? But also, aren't you glad that we have people who love the church, the people in it, enough to say, we love the Bible and we want to be faithful to it, and we love people and we want to do what we can to bring as many people along for the ride as possible. It's not easy, but we need people who can make decisions for all of us with all the nuance that goes into these kind of decisions. And finally, why do we need church authority? Why have people over the church? And I would say this, because being under godly authority in the church is wonderfully freeing. It gives us safety and peace. Because perhaps in some part of what I just explained to you, or the million other decisions shepherds sometimes have to make for the spiritual leadership of a church body, they might be wrong. If it was up to just any one of us, that'd be a really scary thing, for reasons we'll talk about in a minute. But it's really it gives me safety and peace to know there are other people who love Jesus and love my family, and so if I submit to them, I can believe they will lead me to Jesus. If I have to get there on my own by myself, I'm in real dangerous territory, people. I'm just not that good. But if there are other people I can rely on, the sense of peace that gives us. All right, question 2. This one usually comes from elders. Who in the world would want this job? Why would anyone want this job? Why would they want to be shepherds? Sometimes being a shepherd is a real drag. Sometimes it's hard. Sometimes it's complicated, like the issue we just talked about. Sometimes it's challenging because you have to shepherd people that you love and you have to watch them go through seasons of hurt. Sometimes the things that people tell you about what's going on with their lives is just dark and hard and ugly. Sometimes you carry a burden of secrets that nobody will ever know about, but just you and them and Jesus, because you're praying for them fervently. Sometimes you weep with people in ways no one else will know about. Even before we hire somebody on staff, we always have a conversation to say, if you come on this side of church life, you're going to know things you wish you didn't, you're going to see things you wish you didn't, and life is going to get more complicated. Why would anyone want this job? Well, authority comes with responsibility and accountability. This may actually sound more reason not to want it, but I think this is a good thing. You see, the church and the world are always in need of godly people who will take responsibility. And church responsibility, this kind of authority, is responsibility for the ones that you lead and responsibility to the one who has put you in a position of leadership. Open your Bibles to 1 Peter chapter 5. We're going to reference this several times this morning, so let's read it together. On page 981, here's what Peter says. And now, a word to you who are elders in the churches. I too am an elder and a witness to the sufferings of Christ. Notice that Peter, an apostle, is now calling himself an elder. And I too will share in his glory when he is revealed to the whole world. As a fellow elder, I appeal to you. Care for the flock that God has entrusted to you. Watch over it willingly, not grudgingly. Not for what you will get out of it, but because you are eager to serve God. Don't lord it over the people assigned to your care, but lead them by your own good example. And when the great shepherd appears, you will receive a crown of never-ending glory and honor. In the same way, you younger men must accept the authority of the elders. And all of you serve each other in humility, for God opposes the proud, but favors the humble. Peter says that you have responsibility for the ones you were over. This is responsibility to God. And you have accountability to the ones who are under your authority. That can sound like either a good thing or a bad thing. It's really just a double-edged sword. If you are a poor leader, if you exercise your authority in negative ways or in ungodly ways, this is a terrible, terrifying place to be. Who would want this job? Because if you lead the church poorly, you're going to be the one judged for it. James will say it this way. He says, "Dear brothers and sisters, not many of you should become teachers in the church, for we who teach will be judged more strictly." Teaching has traditionally in the church at this time was often the role of whoever the elders or the shepherds were. So if you're a bad leader, this is the last place you want to be, is sitting in the group of shepherds saying, we're going to make choices for everybody, because you're going to be the one judged more severely. Do you see now why the safety comes in of being under spiritual authority? Let's say that the elders, let's not use the women's role stuff. Years ago, there was before I got here even, some conflict about clapping. Do we clap? Do we not clap? How expressive can we be in worship, right? Really, the right question should have been, and do we clap well? Do we clap on rhythm? But that was legitimate conflict that people felt very strongly about. Now, what if the elders got that decision wrong? I don't know, that was 20 years ago or something? Let's say 20 years ago, the elders got that wrong. And for 20 years, here we've been on Sunday mornings clapping-ish. Are we all in trouble? Or are the ones with the authority to make decisions the ones who will be held responsible? See, if you and I have no authority, if we are each our own authority, then every decision we make is between us and God. I don't have the arrogance to believe that I am in any way equipped for that. But if we are under proper authority, then it is the responsibility of those in authority to make decisions for the church. In which case, if I'm submitting to that authority, then I believe that they are the ones who stand before God. And the thing I will be held accountable for is walking righteously with fellow Christians, showing Jesus to the world, and whether or not I followed the authority that was given to me by God. Of course, the flip side, the answer to this, who would want to do this job, comes when you lead well. Because when you lead well, Peter says, you get a reward. Some of that is temporal. Some of that happens here and now. I'm not a shepherd. I told you last week, I have basically no authority. I hopefully get to lead well. But there is a real joy that comes from teaching and then having people go, I never saw Jesus that way. I never understood this, and it's helped my discipleship. There's a reward that comes from that, and there's something that happens in your heart that's unlike any other feeling. When you lead the church well as a shepherd, you get to see people go from those dark moments of life is falling apart to coming alive anew and seeing their lives transformed. And there is nothing better than that. You get to see when unity develops in the church, when love and community happen in the church, those are rewards that you can't quantify. Like, there's no way to put a dollar sign on that or even to explain how it feels except for to say that's what it's all about. And I believe that there is an affirmation that happens from the Holy Spirit when you see the lives being transformed around you as Jesus is being honored and you're leading well. And that is the best feeling that I have found. So authority comes with responsibility, but it also comes with rewards. That's why people would want to do that job, because people need to be under proper authority. And if you're a righteous person leading others to Jesus, there's just nothing better than that. Question 3 is this one I've heard a lot. Should we be wary of people who want to have positions of authority in the church? Should we be wary of them? Absolutely yes. You definitely should. If someone's like, man, I really want to be a shepherd, Paul teaches that that's an honorable aspiration. Fantastic. Jesus also teaches to be wary of them. This is what he says in Matthew chapter 7. Beware of false prophets who come disguised as harmless sheep but are really vicious wolves. You can identify them by their fruit, that is, by the way they act. Can you pick grapes from thorn bushes or figs from thistles? A good tree produces good fruit, and a bad tree produces bad fruit. A good tree can't produce bad fruit, and a bad tree can't produce good fruit. So every tree that does not produce good fruit is chopped down and thrown into the fire. Just in case we've gotten lost in the metaphor, who is the tree at this point? Prophets, false prophets, those who would come in and speak on behalf of God to the church. Those are the good or the bad trees that will be chopped down or be pruned. Yes, just as you can identify a tree by its fruit, so you can identify people by their actions. Jesus says, when you start judging in the church, start with your leaders. Look at them, and he says you don't judge their motives. You never look at a person and go, I'm going to assume why they did this. Instead, you just look at people and go, are they following Jesus? Can I see them following Jesus? If they tell you, oh, I love Jesus, but their actions are far from Jesus, then don't trust them. If they're following Jesus and you're like, well, maybe they have suspicious motives. Are they actively following Jesus consistently? Then trust what they're showing you. That's what Jesus teaches us here. So should you be wary of people who want positions of authority? Absolutely. Judge them according to the standard of Jesus. But if all authority in the church comes from moral authority, then this is how you know that someone is fit to lead. Real quickly, then, that leads us to question 4. Okay, they want to have authority, but what does it mean to lead well? Leadership is multifaceted and complex, but the real question, and I think the only question that is actually biblical, is this. Do the leaders of the church lead with the character of Jesus? That's it. Do the leaders of the church lead with the character of Jesus? Each of us has different gifts, and leading in the church means using your particular gifts for the benefit of others. So here's an interesting interaction. Paul tells Timothy not to neglect the gift that was given to him through the laying on of hands and prophecy. And so this gift that he was given to him to then go and pastor a church. And then he, this 20-something guy, was supposed to select and appoint and anoint elders for that church. I remember me at 23. Oh, it would have been horrific for the church if that had been my job. But he was given a gift, a spiritual gift, to use to bless that church by then appointing other elders so that they would then take over the leadership and authority of that church. Every single elder has this unique blend of strengths and weaknesses. And I'll tell you, some of them, surprise, surprise, aren't good leaders. Raise your hand if you're shocked. Sorry, elders, none of the hands went up. Some elders are bad leaders. Some of them don't have great administrative gifts. Some of them aren't very empathetic. Some of them are bad at following up and asking about the things they prayed for a few weeks ago. Some elders aren't visionaries. Some of them are awkward in hospital rooms. Some of them teach boring Bible classes. Some of them come on too strong. But if every elder has a unique blend of strengths and weaknesses, that's a good thing, because it means the people we select to be authorities in our church family are just people. They don't have to have one personality type. They don't have to have a set of gifts. What they have to be is Jesus followers, and they're just journeying along with us. This is why character matters more than skill set, because following Jesus doesn't get you a particular set of skills that allows you to have authority in the church. Following Jesus produces righteousness. And if someone just like you and me can become more like Jesus over the course of their life, then there's hope for us. Question 5, popular question I've gotten asked a lot. What do we do when we disagree with the elders? Let me tell you briefly a tale of 3 kings. We're not going to read it. It would take most of 2 books. When Israel had no king and really wanted one, the first guy they selected was a guy named Saul. And Saul was anointed king of Israel. He was a military dude. He was a tall, strapping young man. People looked at him. They were like, this guy should be our leader. He was very charismatic. And he started things on a high note, and then very quickly it went south. You can go read this for yourself. Read 1 and 2 Samuel, and you'll learn this story. But basically, Saul's kingship did not go well. He very quickly apostatized, and the people of Israel kind of followed right along with him. And so while Saul was still the king, the prophet Samuel was led by God to go and anoint another king. This guy's name was David. When Saul found out, he wasn't too happy. It's not normally a good thing to have 2 anointed kings running around the kingdom. And so Saul began to try to kill David. Chased them really all over the country of Israel and even sometimes outside the country of Israel. Now you would think that David, as God's correctly anointed and appointed king of Israel, would fight back. But David absolutely refused to do so. And in 2 Samuel, chapter 26, there's a story where Saul is chasing David. He has his people camped all around him. He falls asleep. The whole camp falls asleep. And David sneaks into the camp. David has the opportunity. He has the drop on Saul. And he has the opportunity to take his life. Let's read this together. So David and Abishai went right into Saul's camp and found him asleep, with his spear stuck in the ground beside his head. Abner's the leader of Saul's army, and the soldiers were lying asleep around him. God has surely, he's got to be whispering this, but I'm going to say it a little louder. God has surely handed your enemy over to you this time, Abishai whispered to David. Let me pin him to the ground with one thrust of the spear. I won't need to strike twice. No, David said, don't kill him. For who can remain innocent after attacking the Lord's anointed one? Surely the Lord will strike Saul down someday, or he'll die of old age or in battle. The Lord forbid that I should raise my hand against the Lord's anointed. But take his spear and that jug of water beside his head, and then let's get out of here. David, multiple times in this story with Saul, has the opportunity to reach out and kill Saul. Saul is a wicked king. He's done evil in the eyes of God. He's been rejected by God. And David has been anointed. No one would blame David if he were to step up and take matters into his own hands and go ahead and get this transition going. But David says this, "The Lord forbid that I should raise my hand against the Lord's anointed." That does not mean that in the interim, David does nothing. David leads the people of Israel as if he were the king, but without the authority of the king. Saul, as a bad leader, basically is often cowardly. He doesn't fight the battles. He doesn't protect his people. And so David, for years, runs away from Saul and runs towards the battles to battle the people who are hurting the children of Israel. David is a leader without authority for a long stretch of his life. Many of the Psalms that we read come from this period of his life when he's being hounded by wicked men, namely Saul and his followers, and then is running away, but also protecting God's people. That's 2 kings. There's a third. See, as David got older, he became an ineffective leader. So ineffective that within his own family, there was all kinds of turmoil and turbulence. And he had a son named Absalom. Absalom's sister was sexually assaulted, and David did nothing. And so Absalom takes matters into his own hands. He avenges his sister, and then convinces the people around him that David, my father, has become an ineffective king. It's time for new blood. Anoint me king, and let's start this thing over. And that's exactly what happened. The people of Israel rally around Absalom. They anoint him king, much apart from Samuel, the prophet. They anoint him king, and then he comes into Jerusalem and runs David out and tries to kill his own dad. Several years of back and forth happen where they're kind of fighting each other. David not wanting to kill Absalom, Absalom desperately wanting to kill David, and at the end of it, Absalom dies. 3 different kings, 3 different perspectives on leadership and authority. And in the book titled A Tale of 3 Kings, Gene Edwards makes all kinds of points about leadership and as he compares and contrasts Saul, David, and Absalom. But I read this book in the middle of church drama as a 19-year-old intern in Texas. Their preacher had resigned right before I got there. The elders had decided to hire a new preacher. And there was all this infighting. I know that will shock you. All this infighting about who was going to get picked, who was going to get hired. And in the middle of all that, they asked the 19-year-old intern, "Would you please preach for us?" I had no idea what to tell him. And then I read this book. And it has changed. It changed then and has changed forever the way that I understand authority in the church. Which is not that the people in authority always get it right, or even that they're always the right person for the job, but that the right perspective, the right response to them is to let God deal with them. And for us to be faithful to God and his calling. It's a very dangerous thing, story after story in the Bible. Actually, not even just in the Bible, even outside the Bible, it's a very dangerous thing to try to overthrow God's correctly appointed and anointed authority. And so what do you do if you're in a place or in a time where you have ineffective people who have authority over the church? You do what David did, I think. You submit to the fact that they are the ones with God's authority, and then you lead like crazy. You help God's people. You serve the people around you. You love the people around you, and you wait for God to deal with them. That's the only way that I know to do it. There will be times when we're going to disagree with any group of shepherds leading. Sometimes we're going to disagree strongly. One of the burdens of leadership and authority is that you have to balance the needs and the desires and the wants and the opinions of a diverse group of people. So someone always disagrees with you if you're the shepherds. Congratulations. And in fact, the people disagreeing might even be right. When we disagree with those in authority over us, we should strive to lead effectively without undermining their established authority. This follows the example of David. Undermining one form of authority can lead to a broader mistrust of all forms of leadership. When you subvert one king, you subvert all future kings. As members, kings make it sound like I'm saying they're kings. I'm not. Put another way, if you question the integrity of one election, you risk casting doubt on the integrity of all elections. If you say this person is in charge only until I say they aren't, then who's to say the next person shouldn't also be overcast? There's a reason dictatorships get toppled by violence over and over again. As members of this church family, we should focus not just on the immediate outcome or situation, but also on the process and the culture Even if we disagree with the leader's decisions, it's vital to support and love and engage in respectful disagreements. It's far easier to replace leaders or policies than it is to change a toxic culture. I'm going to say that one more time because this is core to the way that I understand leadership. It is far easier to replace leaders or policies than it is to change a toxic church culture. It takes way longer to change a culture, and it's way more valuable than any specific leader. A loving, Jesus-centered culture is more important than our individual disagreements or preferences. With that said, our shepherds have been looking forward with the desire to make it easier to trust their character and their love for the church. They want to make sure the church is safeguarded so that Adams will always be a place with leaders who work together for the good of the kingdom, so that no matter who the shepherds are, as long as they are godly men, we know that we can trust them to do what is best for the congregation. They've created a job description for shepherds, which I think may be the first time that's ever happened. Not just specific roles, but like for shepherds, there's a job description. And they've adopted new church policy bylaws. Oh boy. But these bylaws are meant to clearly explain some things that have been ambiguous. I'm going to share full printouts next 2 weeks from now. You'll be able to get those of those documents of the shepherd job description and their bylaws. But here's a couple of relevant changes that I found encouraging. At Adams, going forward, and they've already approved this and put this in as our church policy, to be a shepherd, you must have been a member at Adams for at least 3 years. This is to ensure that any shepherd knows our people and our culture, and that we have time to know and trust those leaders. Second, one last thought, because you don't want someone to come in the middle of a shepherd selection cycle, put on a good front, and turns out they're not really a Jesus follower. This is meant to safeguard the church. And going forward, when a shepherd is selected, they agree to serve for 3 years, assuming they still live here, their health allows, and they're consistently following Jesus. But then every 3 years, shepherds have to be re-upped, which means every 3 years, the shepherds have a graceful way to step down, and the church has a graceful way to say, not this time. If you've been a shepherd in here, and many of you have, it can feel like a life sentence. It shouldn't be. And there are times when the whole church needs a voice. And so this makes sure that everybody is heard. One last thing, because the big question in our church a lot of times has been, well, when will we have new shepherds? And the answer is every year, starting in January. Now, we've talked about this in the past, and the answer and a lot of times was, well, are we sure we have guys who are qualified to step in and become shepherds? Which is why I've been saying for 3 weeks now, can I say it a fourth time? In the church, it should be really easy to find men who can serve as shepherds. If you've been in the church your whole life, it shouldn't be all that hard to become a disciple of Jesus, worthy with the character to lead other people. I think we are just absolutely lousy with people who could step into the shepherding roles, because I know you. If shepherding, though, is sitting on a board making decisions in some kind of an organization, not everybody has those gifts. But if being a shepherd is actually about having authority to lead other people to Jesus, then I look around this room and I see men and women like crazy who already do that. Wow, I thought y'all would amen each other there. I'm a bigger fan of you than you are. So going forward, every January, we're going to have a shepherd selection process. And every 3 years, some of the guys may roll off. And at the very least, they're going to put their names back in the hat and say, I'm willing to do it again if you're willing to have me. And over time, as we see the way that they lead, this is a constant back and forth. Because again, the shepherds, the people with authority in the church, are responsible for and to the people they lead. We'll go through the job description later, or I'll at least share it with you. But the job description basically helps us know what they are going to say no to. Not as policy, but just in what they're not allowed to do. You know, like just repicking the color of the pews or something. I was at a church one time where we got a church bus and went $35,000 in debt because the right person asked the one right shepherd the right Sunday. So it's that kind of stuff. All right, last question. Because at the end of all of this, if you're freaked out, this is the question on your mind. Okay, how do you leave a church? How do you leave a church well? And I wanted to do the entire series just for this one point. Because nobody ever taught me this. I never heard anybody talk about this growing up. You either left mad, you left quietly, or you left with another group. Or you moved or died. In fact, I think I know people who moved just to be able to leave the church. How do you leave a church well? If the shepherds have authority and you're supposed to submit to their authority, what happens when you come to a place where you say, I can't go there with you? Or maybe it's not even that. What happens if you just come to a place where you go, I'm kind of stale. I need a new challenge. I need to be shepherded in a different way so that I might grow in a different way. I need something new in my life to help me take the next step in faith. Maybe I feel like God is calling me out of here and to somewhere else. What do you do then? Do you just slip away? Do you let him have it on your way out? How do you leave a church well? Here is what I believe and understand, having gone in depth. I think that when it's time to leave the church, and there are many reasons, when it's time to leave the church, you go to the shepherds and you ask them for their blessing to leave. This is what Jacob, who becomes Israel, says when he wrestles with God, bless me and let me go. What will happen 99% of the time if you go to the shepherd and say, hey, I think it's time for a change for me or for my family. I can't go there with you, or we need something fresh, we need something new. What will happen is they will say, hey, we love you, brother and sister. We hate to see you go, but God bless you. You're welcome back anytime. This is how you maintain the bonds of relationship, because the church is a family, and not just the church at Adams. The church, big C, is a family. This may be our nuclear family while we're here, but you can go to another church and be extended family. But you go and you ask, because when you just leave a church, if you really are family and you say, you know what, I'm done, I'm out, that doesn't feel like extended family, that feels like divorce. You know what I'm saying? And so what you end up doing is destroying relationships on the way out. But righteousness in the teachings of Jesus is restoring relationships, not tearing them apart. Now, if you go to the shepherds, you say, I want to leave, and they say, what happens then if they say no? Do you have to submit and stay? I'm telling you, these are conversations I've had over coffee and lunch. People are like, well, hold on a second. I can't do that. They'll just say no. I would suggest to you that if you have righteous people leading, there's only going to be one reason they say no. And it's because before you leave, there's some sin that you need to work out. There are times, let's say I go and ask the shepherds and say, it's time for me to go. I need to go somewhere else. And they say, you can't go yet. What do you mean I can't go yet? Who are you to tell me that? Well, we know that you've been in this time of interpersonal drama with another person. And you told us about it, and you have not followed Jesus' teachings in Matthew. You have not gone and talked to the person and tried to resolve it. If you leave now, you will not be following Jesus. Do that first, and then we'll bless you to go. Is that good shepherding? I would maintain that it is, if the role of a shepherd is to lead you to Jesus. Now, it is possible you go in and say, I need to go, and they say no, and you say, why? And they say, because we just want you here. Would that be God? They both laughed. Why are you guys laughing when I'm the one in the hypothetical here? I need to go, and the elders laugh. Righteous men will not do that. If your next step in faith requires you moving in peace to another branch of the Lord's family, what righteous person would ever stand in the way of that? Those who would do so are at that point making a power play, and that is not authentic church leadership. If you ask them for their blessing and to go, you kind of put them in a bind. It's a catch-22 for them. They have to say yes to follow Jesus or prove they're not following Jesus, unless the reason that you're on your way out is because of a sin. At which point, they cannot do their job of shepherding. They are responsible for you as long as you are here. And if you want to escape what it means to follow Jesus, they have a spiritual requirement before God to help you follow Jesus better. All right. This is long and in the weeds. It's time to be done. So let's end on a positive note, can we? When this all works out correctly, it creates this peaceful, trusting, godly community where people can flourish in their discipleship. Authority is set up to give us a place of safety and peace. Because when shepherds followed Jesus down to the level of washing the feet of the church, the morality of Jesus doesn't trickle down from the top. It grows up from the bottom like grass. That's where the fruit of discipleship comes from. When the shepherds lead well, when their authority really means serving like Jesus would serve, that is a culture that grows up through the body of the church so that we all love each other better. We all model Jesus for each other better, and we all draw each other closer to Christ. When the elders lead the church wisely and with love, it becomes a self-perpetuating system. That kind of culture breeds more and more of itself. So more and more people can rightly and appropriately have the authority necessary to lead God's people well. It's vibrant, and it's healthy, and it's holy, and it's a place for healing. And so here's the positive note that I would leave you with this morning. When I invite people to Adams, I invite them to come here because Adams is a place to heal. I have all those conversations with people who have been hurt by church leadership in the past, and I say, this is the place you need to come because you will heal here. That, to me, is indicative that something good is going on here. That there is a love for us and a love for Jesus that permeates this place between one another and from our leadership. And as a result, people are coming to know Jesus and lives are being transformed. If we can love you or pray for you this morning, if we can bless you in some way, would you let us know? Let's stand and sing together now.